California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. Thank you for joining us. We are joined today by Chris Ungar. He's a trustee on the San Luis Coastal Unified School Board, but he is now president-elect of the California School Boards Association. Congratulations. That's remarkable.
Thank you.
And I knew you went, and I'm really happy and proud for you.
Well,
what happened?
And I'm just excited about it too. What happened?
How'd that happen? What did you do to make this happen?
Well, you know, I was lucky when I ran for vice president because I ran unopposed.
Yeah, otherwise, you never would have won.
Exactly.
Never. Any opponent would have been beating you.
It would have been, you know, right.
But anyway,
that would have been.
Exactly.
But anyway, and usually what happens is, truly, unless you really screw up, you're probably going to be elected president-elect. You do have to be elected president-elect, but again, nobody chose to run against me, and so I was elected by acclamation, and I'm really excited about it.
So, what issues are on top of mind for the CSBA?
Oh boy, you know, it's going to be an exciting year. I think 2015. Of course, for CSBA, our biggest issue right now is a repeal of the reserve cap, which we think is just, it's egregious.
And let's talk about what that is. It's actually a fascinating yet archaic issue, and it is one whereby in the last budget, the legislature at the behest of the governor passed a rule or a law which said that school districts had to maintain a large reserve. Or was it the reverse, a lower reserve?
Yeah,
help me out.
Kind of a lower reserve.
Okay, help me out.
So school districts are required to have statutory reserve, and the statutory reserve levels depend on the number of students in their school district. So our school district is about 7,300 students. We have to have a 3% reserve against our general fund, against actually all of our funds. So smaller school districts have to have larger reserves, and larger school districts like Los Angeles, I think they only have to have a 1% reserve, but we're talking, you know, $1 billion budget.
And so what did the law do last year?
Well, what happened was when the rainy day fund passed, Proposition 2 passed, there was a legislative attachment to it which said that in times when Proposition 98 was fully funded, when the deferrals were paid back, that the statutory reserves we have to keep could only be twice statutorily what they are. So in our case, that would be a 6% reserve. Now, right now, my district has a 10% reserve.
So what? And the reason it was passed, and now I'm remembering, is because you had probably a teachers union that didn't want school districts to have such a large reserve, because if they had a large reserve, they couldn't spend money on raises.
Well, exactly. And so what the thought was, what the belief was, well, if we free up this reserve money, then the money will be available for salary increases. We don't think that's true. We think that we look at that money as one-time monies. It's a savings account. Like any savings account, it's money you put away, and when it's gone, it's gone.
And one could argue it's a little surprising, given what just happened in the earlier part of this decade, where school districts, I mean, how many were put on notice that they were not meeting their reserves? Countless.
You know, there were districts that were not meeting their statutory reserves. There were districts that met their statutory reserves during the heights or the depths, actually, of the recession, but were able to keep many programs intact because they had adequate reserves. They spent those reserves down. Once you spend down below your statutory reserve, you have to go to the state essentially, and you basically borrow money to bring it back up, and then the state comes in and becomes trustees for your district.
I have to ask you, I mean, you look at the California Teachers Association, you know, they have a lot of power in Sacramento. They ran against a candidate, an upstart for superintendent, very hard. They were very supportive of the incumbent. The upstart was seen as a very viable candidate. He did not win.
Right.
It was close. The incumbent won.
It was
Mr.
very
Torkelson.
close.
And so in a lot of ways, one could argue the CTA is invigorated. You know, their candidate won, and so what's their reason for bending on a win that they obtained last year?
Well, I just think that they're looking for ways to see that there are salary increases for teachers. And because they're a union, they're an association, that's their job. Their job is really to look out for the best interest of their members.
But it'd be one thing if they had taken electoral losses. They haven't. They took a big electoral win when in the rest of the country, reform candidates were winning.
Yes.
Not in California. The reform candidate lost, albeit by a small margin, the closest race of all the statewide offices. So, I mean, what's the strategy here? I mean, how do you maneuver around this?
You know, and it's gonna be really interesting to see how it all plays out, because some of the other things, if we talk about what are going to be really big issues in California in 2015, well, clearly Vergara is still out there.
Yeah, and let me ask you about Vergara, because look, the new chair of the Assembly Education Committee, Patrick O'Donnell, a teacher. I mean, that's what he did for 20 years.
Yep.
He is now chair of the Assembly Education Committee. Query whether he'd be interested in looking at teacher tenure and teacher dismissal.
Well, we know, I can't speak for him, but we know that the Republicans in the legislature are looking forward to re-examining teacher tenure. Remember, Vergara is about tenure. It's about teacher dismissal, and it's about first in,
LIFO,
you know, first, last in, first out, which is a huge issue. We expect that well, it's been appealed. We're thinking now that it will remain kind of calm until after the appeal is decided.
And when will the appeal be decided?
Who knows? That's an interesting question, because what can happen is it's gone to appeal. Now it's up to the courts to decide when they want to hear it. So they could hear it tomorrow, or they could hear it in a year. We don't know that.
At the same time, there's always a question of funding. And it's hard to deny that even though we are in surplus in California, we know that the president, or is she the chancellor of the UC system,
Janet Napolitano.
I mean, look, that former governor, former secretary of Homeland Security, she maneuvered pretty well at the end of last year. She got her board of trustees to pass increases of 5% a year for 5 years if she doesn't get more money from the state.
Right. She is absolutely putting the squeeze on the state for more money for UC. Of course, that's money that's not available for other priorities in the state. Education, my favorite one, but it's also it puts the squeeze on additional health care for people.
I mean, you know, in 2014, K-12 got 42% of the state budget. Health and Human Services, 27.5%. Higher Ed, 11.6%. 9% to prisons. I mean, K-12 is beating higher ed 4-1. You know, could it be? I know there are more students in K-12 than higher ed.
We're talking about 6.2 million students, right?
But at a certain level, look, CSU and UC used to be free. You know, they've gone up 4 times, 8 times in the last 25 years. I'm trying to remember what I read. I mean, it was a huge spike in tuition in our lifetimes. I mean, should we? You know, the UC system is still getting less than before the recession.
Well, and you're absolutely right, Brad. You know, when I got my bachelor's degree, I paid at Humboldt State University, a place like CSU, $60 a quarter. When I went back to get my administrative credential at Cal Poly, it was $700 a quarter, and I thought, my God,
how dare they?
How dare they charge me $700? And of course, it's a lot more now. I think one of the saddest things is this change in belief that we should have free, high quality, secondary, not secondary, but higher education for students. And what does that do to California?
I've seen in social media articles flying around that Germany is now offering 100% free higher ed. It's used as a torch to embarrass California.
You know, and I think one of the ways we need to look at this certainly is we have a continuum of need for educating people in California, starting in preschool and finishing up in the UCs and CSUs, including the community colleges. Now, quickly, the sleeper issue of, I think, 2015 is going to be what's called the Fredericks versus CTA lawsuit.
You'll have to come back and talk about that, you promise?
Absolutely.
Next month. His name is Chris Ungar. He is the president-elect of the California School Boards Association. I'm Brad Pomerance. It's California.